Hello and welcome. In this video, we asked the question, how much power is required for 60 FPS gameplay? Whether at 4K, 2K, or at 1080p, 60 FPS is still considered the sweet spot and the target we all hope to achieve for a smooth gameplay experience. But not all of us can afford the RTX 4090 with its insane price tag, nor the energy cost required to run it. GPUs of today can consume large amounts of power, up to 400 watts plus with the 4090, and generate lots of heat into their immediate surroundings. And considering the world situation as we head into 2025, energy prices across the globe have risen, quite significantly so in Europe and other parts of the world due to conflict. So, is it possible to conserve energy, reduce heat, while still enjoying the glorious 60 FPS smooth gameplay? And how much GPU power is even required to play at 60 FPS with 4K, 2K, or 1080p resolutions? Using the RTX 4070, I'll demonstrate in this video how power consumption and upscaling tech play a role in achieving this 60 FPS experience. Now, as a disclaimer, this isn't meant to be a wholly scientific or a deep dive or detailed study, but rather an anecdotal look at trends that I've observed. The testing methodology here is simple. I've tested 5 games here and using the NVIDIA app at the driver level limited to 60 FPS max regardless of in-game settings. In addition, any upscaling or frame insertion tech such as DLSS and frame generation has been turned off to demonstrate the raw rasterization power of the RTX 4070 and the power levels that are required at 4K, 2K, and at 1080p. Let's begin with the first game. This is an older game, but still a very popular one. Looking at the results from Shadow of the Tomb Raider, we see that the frame rate charts show that this game is no sweat for the RTX 4070. Further, looking at the power figures here, we see that it's easily able to peak at 60 FPS, but is nearly consuming the full 200 watts TGP of that RTX 4070 GPU. At 4K resolution, we're seeing a power consumption here of 178 watts. At 2K, that drops down to about 112 watts. And finally, at FHD resolution or 1080p, we see a minimal power consumption as compared to 2K and 4K resolutions of 80 watts. That's nearly a halving of the power from 178 watts at 4K to 80 watts at 1080p resolution, kind of to be expected considering that from 1080p to 4K, the jump in resolution actually quadruples the numbers in terms of pixel counts when you're playing at that high resolution. Now let's take a look at a different type of game here, a different genre of game. Company of Heroes 3 is an RTS game, again with settings at maximum presets and at 4K, 2K, and 1080p resolutions benchmarked using the in-game benchmark tool. We see here that the game is no sweat for the RTX 4070. And if we look at the power figures, we see that the TGP is 140 watts at 4K resolution, which is quite promising considering that leaves lots of headrooms here for further optimization or further performance extraction by playing with the different settings and optimizing the game settings to get the best visual results. If we drop the resolution down to QHD or 1440p resolution, we also see a drop in power figures here for down to 112 watts from 140 watts. Not that significant a drop in this type of game from 140 watts, but it is a drop nonetheless. And finally, at FHD or 1080p resolution, we see a nominal 80 watts of power consumed with maximum preset on the RTX 4070, no sweat, and we see here that it is again a halving or near halving of the 4K resolution's power consumption figures. Let's see how the RTX 4070 fares for power consumption with a powerful and a newer game such as Dragon Age: The Veilguard. It's been featured in more than a few of my videos. I'm quite enjoying my time with this game and somewhat of a return to form for BioWare. The figures here are revealing though. The RTX 4070 struggles are 4K, even being driver limited to 60 FPS in this game at ultra settings and with ray tracing turned off. We see that this is indeed a demanding game. The game is very playable and enjoyable throughout despite what the frame rate charts show. That's why numbers aren't always the be-all and end-all when it comes to the gameplay experience. The RTX 4070 does fare quite a bit better at 2K and finally at 1080p with much more stable and consistent 60 FPS gameplay. The power levels in this game start off at 187 watts at 4K resolution, dropping to 154 watts at 2K and just 110 watts at 1080p resolution, nearly half that power again, that TGP rated of 200 watts for the RTX 4070. The next game we'll look at here is Dragon's Dogma 2. another recent release that can be quite demanding if you turn on all the settings to maximum, as well as enable ray tracing support in the game. For this demonstration, however, DLSS, frame generation, and ray tracing have been turned off. At 4K resolution and without the help of DLSS or frame generation, we see that the RTX 4070 struggles to maintain even a 60 FPS frame rate, all the while consuming 185 watts. A much more stable showing at 2K with a near lock 60 FPS without too much trouble, and the power consumption falls to 136 watts. And finally, at 1080p resolution, we see, with something similar to 2K, we see power figures of 132 watts, showing that perhaps the game engine here isn't scaling as well to lower resolutions, and there is a base power figure that's much higher for the Dragon's Dogma engine than is for other comparable games. One of the key features of the RTX 4000 series has been DLSS 3 and frame generation. With DLSS 3 and now the latest iteration 3.5, you get much better upscaling technology to help take lower resolutions and scale them to near 1440p or 4K resolutions for much smoother and much higher gameplay and frame rates. That said, if you combine that with frame generation, another feature of the 4000 series and an exclusive, allows you to essentially double the frame rates by inserting frames within the frames that are actually rasterized by the GPU. In most cases, this results in a doubling or near doubling of the frame rates. So what happens if we enable DLSS and frame generation in Dragon's Dogma 2? How does it affect the power figures and the gameplay and a more stable FPS, 60 FPS lock at 4K, 2K, and 1080p resolutions? Well, in the case of Dragon's Dogma 2, this is going to be a pleasant surprise. At 4K resolution, we do see a much more stable 60 FPS lock, or a closer to 60 FPS lock, but we do see the power consumption reduce at 4K resolution down to 136 watts. This is a fantastic figure, meaning that DLSS 3 is not only giving us more frame rates and better performance, but is also doing it in a much more efficient manner, leveraging more of the GPU's tensor cores and the shader cores much more effectively. We see a similar thing at 2K resolution. We're now dropping down the power to only 76 watts, and further if we jump to or drop down to 1080p, we see that the power levels drop again, and power consumption now is only a measly 58 watts for a much more stable and locked 60 FPS resolution. Alright, now for the last game. Black Myth Wukong came onto the scene with so much hype. It's a stunning looking game and includes lots of bells and whistles, including ray tracing. For the purpose of this test, however, DLSS and frame generation has been turned off, and super resolution of 50% has been set regardless of target resolution. This game engine prefers to scale the super resolution number as you change between 4K, 2K, and 1080p resolution, which didn't allow for a stable test and comparison. So to do so, I've forced the super resolution to 50%, regardless of what resolution we're going to be testing at. Starting with 4K, consuming nearly the full TGP, once again at 183 watts, the frame rate isn't quite stable at 60 FPS. Despite that, as stated earlier though, the game looks great and smooth. Dropping that down to 2K nets a more or less similar experience, and with little change to power levels at 182 watts. And finally, reducing the resolution to 1080p brings the power levels down and the frame rates close to a stable and nearly locked 60 FPS throughout at 168 watts. Out of the 5 games used for testing here, this is the game that consistently used as much power as possible and was also producing the best looking game in my opinion, visuals in my opinion. Despite having the super resolution set to an in-engine 50% consistently, the power consumption figures were the highest overall. One of the motivations for making this video was just that numbers, charts, and figures don't always represent what the gameplay experience ultimately is like. They do give us an indication, and as enthusiasts certainly give us a baseline to work from. And considering that 60 FPS is still a great baseline target, it's something that can be achieved at or around 100 to 130 watts of power, particularly with the RTX 4070. Though there are exceptions, there is a trend that starts to appear showing why the RTX 4070 has been pinned as a 2K GPU. We see that the RTX 4070 can easily push 60 FPS frame rates in almost all games tested at this power level. This is also indicative of the power levels set for laptop versions of these GPUs. Ultimately, there is a power curve, and indirectly, in a way, this validates that power curve and corroborates that 4070 laptop version GPUs have a max power of 140 watts. There is one caveat to this whole story that needs to be mentioned. In order to have smooth 60 FPS gameplay, a powerful GPU and power consumption aren't enough. In my testing, I was pairing this with a G-Sync capable 4K 240Hz mini LED monitor. If you have a monitor that is capable of variable refresh rate, or VRR as it's more commonly known, you'll have a great time even when frame times go higher or frame rates dip below 60 FPS. Well, that'll do it for this video. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you found this information useful or at least interesting. Please click the like button, hit that subscribe button, and click that notification bell so you're the first to know when there's new content available here. Thanks very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.